Fear in tennis doesn't always come from power. Sometimes it comes from certainty. The certainty that your best shot won't be enough. The certainty that the court belongs to someone else. The certainty that no matter what you try, the match is slipping away. Some players were feared because they made tennis look unfair. Others because they made it unpredictable. And a few because they took control before the first rally even began. By the end of this video, one name will stand above the rest. But the path to that name tells us something much deeper about the game. Fear is not about intimidation alone. It's not about shouting, or dominance, or reputation. True fear in tennis appears quietly. It shows up when players change tactics too early. When they rush points, they don't need to rush. When they stop playing their game and start reacting. That's why the most feared players were rarely the loudest. They were the ones who changed how matches felt. And to understand that, we need to start with a different kind of fear. There are players who don't overwhelm. They don't crush the ball every rally. They don't dominate headlines, but they take something away. Time. Players like Alexander Bublik don't win by force. They win by disruption. The underarm serve, the sudden drop shot, the refusal to play the rally you prepared for. Opponents aren't afraid of losing points. They're afraid of losing control. Against players like this, preparation becomes useless. Patterns disappear, comfort vanishes. You're no longer playing tennis. You're reacting. That uncertainty is its own form of fear. Then there are players who don't hide their chaos. Nick Kyrgios is feared for a completely different reason. You never know which version you're getting. And worse, neither does he. One moment, he's relaxed, almost playful. The next, he's serving at full speed, taking the racket out of your hands, feeding off the crowd. What makes Kyrgios dangerous isn't consistency, it's belief. On the days he believes, opponents feel it immediately. Not because he's unbeatable, but because he's uncontainable. You can't plan for someone who doesn't follow the script. And here's a question, one worth thinking about, which is harder to face in tennis: a player who never misses, or a player who never plays the same point twice? Put your answer in the comments, because the rest of this video depends on how you see that difference. As we move higher, fear begins to shift. It's no longer about unpredictability, it becomes about inevitability. Roger Federer wasn't intimidating in the traditional sense. There was no visible strain, no sense of effort, but that calm was exactly what unsettled opponents. When someone hits winners without rushing, when they glide instead of sprint, when they look comfortable in moments that should feel heavy, it sends a quiet message. You're working harder than I am, and that wears players down long before the scoreboard does. Federer's fear factor didn't come from aggression, it came from elegance. Opponents felt like they were always a step late, always guessing, always reacting to something already finished. The game moved at his pace, and no one else's. But fear doesn't stop there, because sometimes fear has nothing to do with style. Sometimes it's about location. Rafael Nadal on clay created a very specific kind of tension. Players didn't just lose matches, they lost hope. Long before the first ball, the surface itself felt hostile. The rallies dragged, the angles stretched wider, the points refused to end. Against Nadal on clay, players didn't ask, how do I win? They asked, how long can I last? That psychological shift matters. Once survival replaces belief, the match is already moving in one direction. This is where fear begins to deepen. It's no longer about chaos, no longer about beauty, no longer about surface. It becomes about removal. Removing time, removing options, removing belief. And the players who mastered that are still ahead. In the second half of this story, the fear becomes sharper. You'll see players who took away strengths instead of attacking weaknesses. Players who turned serves into weapons you couldn't touch, and one presence that didn't just dominate surfaces, but erased safe spaces entirely. That's where true fear lives. Some players weren't feared because of chaos or beauty. They were feared because one part of the game simply disappeared: the serve. Facing players like Pete Sampras, matches were often decided before rallies began, not because opponents played badly, but because opportunities never came. Games slipped away in seconds. Breakpoints were rare, tie breaks became unavoidable. Against a dominant server, pressure flips. You're no longer thinking about winning points. You're thinking about not losing yours. and that pressure compounds. One loose service game can erase an entire set. That kind of tension drains belief faster than any long rally ever could. But serving fear alone has limits, because there's a deeper level when fear follows you everywhere, across surfaces, across conditions, across years. This is where the modern era begins to change the meaning of intimidation. Players like Jannik don't overwhelm with drama, they overwhelm with clarity. There are no wasted movements, no emotional swings, no free points. Every rally feels deliberate, every shot arrives early, every mistake feels punished. What makes Sinner difficult isn't just his power, it's how little space he gives back. Opponents don't feel attacked, they feel contained, and containment is suffocating. Then there's Carlos Alcaraz, feared for the opposite reason, not control, freedom. Alcaraz plays with speed, creativity, and confidence that breaks pattern. Drop shots when you expect power, acceleration when you expect reset. Against him, rhythm never settles. And when rhythm disappears, players panic, because tennis depends on timing, and Alcaraz disrupts it constantly. He doesn't wait for mistakes, he invites them. At this level, fear becomes unavoidable. But even here, there is still hierarchy. Some players don't just challenge you, they remove choices. This is where everything converges. Facing Novak Djokovic, fear doesn't arrive suddenly. It builds. You try your best shot, it comes back deeper. You change direction, the angle closes, you rush, he's already there. What separates Djokovic is not power or flair or even surface, it's inevitability. Every option feels temporary, every advantage feels borrowed. Players don't feel beaten, they feel gradually erased, strengths neutralized, patterns solved, belief slowly drained. This is fear without chaos. Fear without noise, just pressure, applied relentlessly. And this is why Djokovic stands alone. Not because he wins the most, not because he lasts the longest, but because no matter who you are, no matter how you play, there is nowhere to hide. Against him, the match doesn't explode, it closes in. Fear in tennis isn't about being loud, it isn't about dominance in highlights, it's about control. Control of space, control of time, control of belief. The most feared players didn't scare opponents, they limited them. And once limitation sets in, the outcome becomes familiar. So when we talk about fear in tennis, we're not talking about intimidation, we're talking about presence. The kind that changes decisions, the kind that reshapes matches, the kind that lingers long after the handshake. That's what these players shared, and that's why they'll always be remembered, not just for winning, but for how they made tennis feel when they stood on the other side of the net.